My name is Carl Quo, and this is Founder Quest, a podcast about the journeys of starting a game studio.
Today, we're talking with Jen MacLean of Dragon Snacks Games, founded last year in 2024. Jen comes from a long history in the game industry at some of the largest players in the space, most recently at Microsoft, Amazon, but going all the way back to 38 Studios, as well as spending a lot of time in the IGDA supporting the entire industry. We talk about what pushed her to start a new studio in this moment in the industry, how the early part of her founding journey has gone, and how she supports herself with a personal board of directors. I found the conversation filled with thoughtful reflections, lessons learned, and a warmth and empathy that made it a delight. Let's jump in. Where I like to start with folks is really asking the question of what tipped you over the edge to found a company, right? Like oftentimes I think folks who are going or approaching their first founding journey are like, maybe I do this, maybe I don't. They're talking to people, they're thinking about it. But then there's some series of things or some moment that pushes you over to where you realize, no, I'm emotionally committed to this journey now. I am going to found a studio. And I'd love to hear the story of how you got there.
Yeah, I had been thinking about founding a studio for a few years before I actually made the jump. And it was one of those things where I was thinking about it and thinking about it. And I kept feeling more and more of an urge that if I'm going to do this, I need to do it now. And there were kind of three pivotal things that happened to really help me see that this is the right time. First was a conversation I had with Ed Fries back in April of 2024. And he asked me two questions because I had reached out to him saying, "Hey, I'm thinking about starting something. I would love to get your thoughts. You do so much investing, you understand the space so well." And Ed and I had worked together in multiple capacities over the course of my career. So he also knew me really well. And he said, "Okay, well, what's the worst that could happen?" And immediately I said, "Well, I can't raise any money and we go out of business." And he said, "Okay, so what?" Like that happens to a lot of people. And as long as you've learned something along the way, as long as you can be thoughtful about what happened and why, and it makes you better, it makes you a stronger candidate, not a weaker candidate. And the second question he asked was, "What's holding you back?" And immediately I was like, I need a designer. It was very much an intuitive, like, oh crap, if I'm going to do this, I need a designer reaction. And I thought, okay, that's something I can overcome. That's something that has a solution. So fast forward to August 2024, and my role at Microsoft was undergoing some changes. And I had the opportunity to really take a step back and ask myself, do I want to stay at one of the largest, most valuable companies in the world? Or do I want to do something a little bit different? And I was talking with a good friend and mentor, and he asked me, "Jen, do you want to write a line in a resume or do you want to write a line in a eulogy?" And wow, that framing, Carl, that framing was so powerful because I could have stayed at a Microsoft, at a large tech company, could have gone back to Amazon, could have gone many, many places. And I would have always been constrained by the challenges of working at a very big company, someone else's very big company. And it would have been a line in a resume, but my resume was pretty good, which was Ron's point. And when I thought about the times over my career I'd been happiest, it was when I felt like I had the most impact on people's lives, not on a piano. And thinking about, at Xbox, my team was responsible for billions of dollars in revenue. But at the end of the day, we made big companies bigger. And as much as I love those big companies and I love the games that they make, it's not like making something yourself. It's not like making something that has meaning and emotional value to you. And I thought, I'm not going to be working forever. If I look ahead to maybe 10 more years, I don't want to spend it making big companies bigger. I don't want to spend it at a very big company dealing with the very big company challenges, working on somebody else's agenda and someone else's priorities. I want to do something that matters to me. And the third thing that happened was I had a very early conversation with Shannon Loftus. And we were talking about starting a studio, and she asked, well, would you start one with me? And I'll fast forward because this is a little bit spoilery. Shannon is not one of my co founders, she is an advisor and investor. And it was the first time that someone I respected said, "But would you do this with me?" And that validation, that vote of confidence, it was almost like the mother bird pushing the baby bird out of the nest, saying, "You can do this, go fly, go fly." And it gave me the courage to really start seeing myself as a founder. And even though, again, fast forward, she decided it wasn't the right time for her to co found a company, it was the validation that I needed from someone whose judgment I trust and respect so much.
So you have the conversation with Ed, and you realize that the downside isn't so down, and you need a designer. You get more validation from your mentor saying like, hey, actually, I want to have this bigger impact. I want to do these things. And then you have the validation of someone saying like, oh, actually, if you're doing a thing, would you do it with me? Like, I'd love to found with you. You find yourself pushed over that threshold of like, okay, I'm doing it. I'm on the road. Presumably you start that sort of like co-founder dating conversation right then and there, but like you're figuring out once you cross that, what was the biggest things that you realized, oh, now I need to learn this and figure out that? And like, what I didn't know that I didn't know X, Y, and Z. Like, what were those really big things that you had to go on a learning journey immediately after you found yourself coming into
Oh, there have been so many things I didn't know that I didn't know.
it?
The first thing that I did was I wrote a values and principles document because, from my perspective, the what will change because it's game development. The how and the why should be more fixed. And it was very much a rough draft, and I shared it with a lot of people whose opinions mattered to me. Scott Hartzman was also super, super helpful in this. And uh, it became the starting point for the conversations with potential co founders. And when I've shared it with people, a lot of times like, there's a joke that, oh, they must be cutting onions while they're reading the document because it is so meaningful. It's meaningful to me. It's meaningful to Chris and Michelle. The document has changed a lot as the three of us together have iterated on it. But it really does define for Dragon Snacks the how and the why. And at the end of the day, I think those are the things where it's most important that the founders' visions be aligned because the what will change. And hopefully, we will make a second, a third, and fourth, and fifth game, and the what will change. But the how we do something, and especially the why, those are going to be things that are core to the team that we build, things that are core to the product that we build, and things that are really our guiding principles very much.
So maybe that is the answer, but looking back on, you started out thinking about maybe you'll found a thing and maybe now is the time, and here you are, you founded a thing, you have co-founders, you're on this journey. A lot of our listeners are folks who are considering founding a company or are like on that journey of like, maybe I want to commit, maybe I want to do things. From your journey so far, even recognizing you're relatively early on that journey, what is the biggest learning point you've had so far from that like decision to found and that initial point that you would teach folks now?
I have found that I really need to temper my natural impatience. So, one of the Amazon leadership principles is bias for action. And I was always off the charts on bias for action. But what I found is that there is an art of strategic waiting. And when I look back at our first 6 months, I think my biggest regret is that I started talking to potential investors too soon. I wish that I had given our team a little bit more time to iterate and iterate and iterate, because we're still doing that. But the company and game that we're pitching now is very different than what we started conversations on back in October. And I do think that if I had been a little bit more patient and allowed us to really dive deep in what sets us apart, in what sets our product apart, the early institutional funding conversations might have gone a little bit differently. And we've still raised money. We've, raised significant amounts of money from angel investors. But I think the combination of impatience on my side, plus just frankly a really crappy funding environment, did not do us any favors.
Yeah, I think I think there's a lot of energy that you walk into, or like there's for me at least, there was that sort of flip over of like there was that moment of like, yeah, I'm gonna found a company, I'm committed to it, and to your point, that builds so much momentum of like, oh, now I have all this energy, I want to do it, and that can turn so quickly into that bias for action of like, I gotta do stuff, right? Like, and what's the next check mark? Let me go and check it. And to your point, I think that there's a lot of spaces where so much of founding and co-founders and values and principles and things are things that take time
Hmm.
to marinate and develop, even to get to the crisp story that is going to turn the first investor's head, that is going to set you apart, that is going to put the right stake in the ground. And it's so easy to try and rush that, I think,
Yep.
for sure. So you mentioned that you had the dear friend and advisor who is invested but originally started as a co-founder potential. You mentioned Chris and Michelle are your co-founders. How did you go from through co-founder dating and find the two folks that you co-founded with?
So, when I thought about co founders, the two roles to me that were most important were design, first and foremost, and tech. And I had my list of kind of dream co founders. If I could work with anybody, who would I work with and why? And I also talked to some friends privately and said, hey, I'm thinking about starting a studio. This is the product that I'd like to make. Who would you recommend as a co founder? And got a few names there as well. And I reached out to Chris Nemkowski, who I had known for more than 15 years. We had worked together shipping Kingdoms of Amalur Reckoning at Big Huge Games. And I knew that Chris had shipped Monopoly Go at Scopely and then left, took some time off. As you can imagine, he was a little burnt out after that.
Yeah.
And I reached out to him and said, hey, I'm thinking about starting something. Do you have time to talk about it? Are you interested? And he said, yeah, let's talk, but you should know I had this idea that I'm fixated on and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to give it up. Well, as it turns out, we had very, very similar ideas because the things that I was seeing as I watched my 8-year old, my 12-year-old, and my 20-year-old play games, he was seeing with his 8-year-old. And he had been talking with Michelle Menard, who he had worked with at Zynga. Michelle has a 10-year-old. She is seeing the same things with her 10-year-old. And she is an amazing systems designer. She got her start in the games industry working for Firaxis as a writer and designer on Civ 5, worked on XCOM, then went to Zynga and did a lot of social systems design. And for the game that we wanted to build, she was like, if you could describe anybody, you would describe Michelle. She's also an amazing technical designer. So she spends as much time in the code really as Chris does, which is a real gift for a small studio. And the three of us, so we used that values and principles document. We started talking about it. They made a bunch of edits. We all collaborated and we thought, okay, not only do we have the same idea around this opportunity, but we want to build the same company. We want to build the same team. When Chris and I first started talking, we compared budgets and timelines. Our budget was within 10%. And so we had that, wow, okay, we both want to build a small studio, make it deliberately small. We both want to lean on co-dev and outsourcing. We both want to have a fully distributed team. So, a lot of the really big, hairy questions we went into founding the company with alignment on. And the ones where we might not have had direct alignment or where it was really important to one of the three co founders, that values and principles document helped identify those areas really quickly. And it gave us a framework for talking about why certain things are important. Why, Jen, why did you put this line about toxic positivity in here? Chris, why did you put this line about neurospicy in here? And it really gave us this opportunity to talk a lot more about what we've learned and about how we want to take those experiences forward and use them to make the best team that we've ever worked on.
You sort of described the sort of two slots in some
Mhm.
ways as, tech and design is what you kind of went out there looking for. Like, okay, which is a pretty common sort of framing of like how people sort of start their co-founder journey. If you think of the like, okay, what are the job roles that complement me? I assume you would put yourself as business or product. How would you frame yourself?
I am more business. I had a very definitive product vision kind of going into this. So the three things I sent over to Chris were a 3-page high level design doc, a budget, and values and principles document. And again, there was just so much overlap between our budget, between the values and principles doc that I had written, and the way he and Michelle saw setting up a team and setting up a company. And with the 3-page design that I was working on, again, it was probably 80% overlap. And there's stuff that has changed over the last 6 months. But the core of what we're building, where you play within a chosen community, where it's collaborative and cooperative, where it's optimized for 3-minute, 30-minute, 90-minute play sessions, where it's cross platform by design, that hasn't changed. And those are also fundamentals. And for me, I am comfortable stepping back and saying to Michelle, as our chief creative officer, like, you own the creative, right? Like, I'm not going to weigh in on the lore. I'm not going to weigh in on character naming. That is all you. And I think being able and willing to do that has really added a lot of trust to our relationship. And at the same time, I feel more comfortable saying, okay, I'm going to look at these deals and I'm going to look at this structure and I'm going to make these decisions. And I go back to my co founders for their input because it is as much their company as it is mine. But we have those really well defined swim lanes. And we also have both trust and a mechanism so that we touch base, just the three of us, at least once a week, and we're able to talk about the things that are going well and the things that aren't going well and where we need help and where we want to get other founder input. And every week, as part of that standing meeting, we have a vibe check on the agenda, right? So, how's everybody feeling right now? What's stressing you out? What's making you happy? And that is also really, really important, especially when you're building a fully remote studio.
Yeah, for sure. When you think about the makeup now, sort of like
Mhm.
you've built the team, you've had a chance to gel and really develop, and for sure you have the swim lanes. But do you still think of the makeup of the founders and how you bring it to the table of like, oh, business versus tech versus design, or is there another like any other almost like personality style components, or the like I'm the optimist and Chris is the pragmatic one and Michelle is whatever, or like other ways that you sort of slice that dynamic of what is the important components of that
Yep.
makeup and how do you complement each other outside of just your job roles?
Yeah, it's a great question. First and foremost, all of us on the team, not just the founders, go into this with a very low ego. And I had one of our advisors say, like, this team has the lowest ego of, in a good way, of anyone that I've ever worked with, because we're willing to say, like, hey, I like this, but I might be wrong. So help me understand why you like that instead. And one of the things in our values and principles doc is going into any disagreement, assuming you are 51% wrong, and going in to seek to understand as opposed to seek to win an argument, because it's such a different mindset. that's one of the things we assess candidates on. And we are very transparent about that. We give them the values and principles document before we talk to them. We say, read it. We say, you're going to be asked behavioral interview questions on it. And make sure that this is a place that is exciting to you. So we look at that. We also look at really trying to create a place where everyone feels valued. We want to create a game where everyone feels valued. You can't do that if the people making the game don't feel valued. And so, really going out of our way to make sure that people have a chance to give feedback on something, especially the things that are really important to them. The other thing that we do, you talk about personality types, and we actually did a personality inventory as part of our work with another advisor. Michelle and I are very similar. Chris is very much an outlier, and it really subverts gender expectations on its head because Michelle and I are like very focused on achievement, focused on accomplishment, moving forward, progress, progress, progress. And Chris is much more the warm, fuzzy, does the dad jokes at stand up, always says, like, hey, how's vibes? How are things going? And it cracks me up, but also it makes me feel so grateful because it's such a good compliment to my strengths and Michelle's strengths to have somebody who is very, very good at what he does, but also brings that kind of sunnier, warm, fuzzy element to the interactions too.
As you guys sort of have gone on this journey, and you have this really clear alignment mechanism that has been a north star for the studio of the values and principles. You complement each other in many ways, and you have these different personalities. And part of that values and principles is going in and how you approach disagreements, how you approach understanding, and that kind of stuff. I'm curious, like, as a group of founders, I assume it's not all, oh, everyone votes exactly the same way. You're three humans who have three sets of opinions. There's inevitably going to be some amount of friction, if not outright conflict. How do you guys find yourselves working through decisions and dealing with disagreements as your co-founder?
It gets back to seeking to understand instead of seeking to win. And I can give you a specific example that we just went through today, actually, where I had drafted a community plan that lays out kicking off a community in Discord, why we want to do it now, a year before we announce the game, how we're going to measure success, what the plan is for community engagement, pitfalls to be aware of. And Michelle, when she looks at that plan, she was very focused on you can't randomize my dev team, very understandably. Like, we need to figure out a way to balance the stuff you want to put on Discord with the teams need to get stuff done. Except because we are all potty mouths, we probably would have used stronger language there. And she's right. And I'm right too. Because my point is, like, look, we need a Discord, we need community if we're going to do a friends and family beta test. We need to do it if we're going to really reach out to this audience. And so my approach was saying, look, I get it. I don't want to randomize the dev team. Here are the things that I think I can make do with. Can we be okay with one piece of art per 2 sprint week or 2 week sprint? Yeah, okay. And it doesn't have to be super polished. One of our artists does really cool work with like little notes on the side. And that's actually the kind of thing I think a community would really love to see, opening the doors on what game development is like. Or polls. One of Michelle's pieces of feedback was, hey, I don't want to be locked into a poll schedule because there might be a question that comes up that I want immediate response on. And I'm like, okay, great. So what if we approach it as we have this list of 10 polls that we can look at when we want to do our weekly once day poll. But when you have something that is time sensitive or topical, we don't use what was on the plan. We swap something else in, or we do a bonus poll that week. And so looking for ways to find that common ground, also looking for understanding what the other person's concerns are and what their goals are. Because the reality is that our goals overlap, right? Like, I don't want to randomize the dev team either. And she wants a thriving community where we have playtesters and evangelists. And so, really looking at it from the perspective of let's find those common goals. Let's give people space to air what's really worrying them. And let's look for a solution together that we can all at least live with, if not be happy about. That's really the goal in terms of how we approach conflict.
So you've talked a little bit about this, but could you tell us a bit about how you're funded currently in whatever detail you feel comfortable sharing?
Yep, we have raised a significant angel investment. We are also looking at other funding options. Our game budget is relatively small compared to a lot of peers I've seen starting their studio. So we are looking at an overall game budget of $8 million. We also really want to work with a publisher because there are capabilities that I don't want to build in a team of 20 people, things like localization or compatibility testing, for example. And so, from my perspective, I look at funding with okay, what kind of money do we want to bring in perspective? Because all money has strings attached. And
Mm-hmm.
it's really, can you live with the strings that are attached? And, some of the strings might be good ones, like a publisher saying, yes, of course, we'll take loc off your plate. We'll take compatibility testing off your plate. Other strings are not good. And it's things like what backend do they, percentage do they want? Or for a publisher, for example, we feel really, really strongly about the need to talk to a community very early, to start showing them what we're working on very early. And we know that that's not uh, necessarily unanimous with publishers. And so, as we talk to a publisher, we'll say, this is the most important priority for us. If you don't agree with this approach, that's fine. We're just not going to be the good fit. And we should say thanks, but no thanks. And really understanding, like, hey, how do you want money, but also what can you compromise on and what can't you compromise on? And having that clarity before you go into your funding conversations has been absolutely critical. And making sure that as founders, you have that clarity together is absolutely critical.
As you've gone on this journey and been looking at, I think the point that is super salient that every source of money has strings and expectations that come along with it. And you really want to know what those expectations are
Yep.
before you sign the contract, right? What's the biggest difference between how you thought you would fundraise and what you thought the fundraising experience might be like versus what's actually happened?
Oh, so much to unpack in that question. Um, I have raised a lot of money over my career. So, over $100 million across various roles. And I was naive about how challenging the fundraising environment is right now. I don't think I fully appreciated how difficult it is. The other thing that I didn't fully appreciate is the need to create urgency in fundraising conversations because it is so easy, especially right now, for people who could write a check to say, okay, well, let's check in at this next milestone, or let's check in at vertical slice, or let's check in a month. And one of the things that I have been thinking about a lot recently is how you create that FOMO, that sense of missing out if I don't act. How do you create that sense of urgency? I don't have a guaranteed answer. If I did, it would be a little bit of a different situation. But a lot of what I do think about is, okay, how do we set up that out of this list of potential funding sources, these are the ones that we most want to work with. These are the strings we're most comfortable with. So let's push the deal forward. And pushing the deal forward is probably harder right now than it has been at any other time in my career, including the 2008 recession.
Yeah, it's a very tough market out there.
Yep.
So when you look at this fundraising journey for you personally, so like I really want to start to zoom in on you, Jen, right? You've obviously had a ton of experience raising money before. You've been in this industry uh, and been at quite amazing roles for a while. What has been the part that's been the hardest of that fundraising journey for you personally?
Not taking things personally, especially as a founder, because when someone tells you no, it is hard to not take that personally because it's personal. And it might not be, even though it feels like it. So, for example, we were talking to a VC who said, look, I love you, I love your team, love the idea. We are still in the process of closing this fund, and we have made a very similar investment out of the two we've made from the active fund. If 2 out of 3 are very similar games, it puts us at risk for closing our fund. I know intellectually that had nothing to do with me. Still stung, still hurt, still took it personally. And sometimes you're just unlucky. Sometimes you talk to the wrong person at the wrong time. But I don't think it ever doesn't feel personal when you're the founder, especially because there is such a weight of responsibility. Because if I don't raise money, people don't get paid. So, how can you not take that personally? And I don't know that I have a great answer to that, except I do remind myself that, look, even in a really crappy environment, we've still raised quite a bit of money. And all it takes is one yes. All it takes is one yes. And we've gotten a lot of yeses so far. So reminding myself that, look, a lot of people that I trust, who I respect, have literally put their money where their mouths are. But also, it only takes one yes is how I deal with some of the sting of the no's.
I think that's a very powerful framing that is very difficult to live. Uh,
Yes.
it is something that, like, I repeat to myself, I've repeated to other founders, and I've really tried to live in and remind myself is that, you may talk to in a giving funding round, like, let's say on the low end you talk to 30 VCs, and I know people who have talked to a lot more in a funding round, right? And to your point, it's not, you don't, you actively do not want more than 5 to say
Mm-hmm.
yes, right? Like, in fact, you really kind of just want 2 or 3 to say yes.
Yep.
And so it is that, like, that thinking, like, it just is one yes. Find the person you connect with, find the one. And the people who say no, 9 times out of 10, it's not you, it's them, right? Like, for all these things, it's so hard. Like, to your point though, it's so hard to live that, right? Like,
Yes.
in that moment, to live that, to hear that no, and not, like, I have literally rage quit out of my office when I've gotten a no email. And, like, to your point, it's not a thing about you, it's not a thing about your pitch necessarily. Most of the time it's they're still raising funds or whatever, but
Yep.
super hard to live. If we stay on the track of sort of looking at you as on your individual journey, what have you found to be your biggest struggle as a founder, and how have you been approaching supporting yourself through that struggle?
I think the biggest, so there's two struggles that I have really dealt with. There is the practical work struggle of, there is more work than you can possibly do ever. Unless you invent a way to stop time while you get to do your work, there's always going to be more work. And so drawing that boundary in a way that maximizes your impact, which does not necessarily mean maximize your productivity, and that gives you the mental and physical and emotional space you need to recharge. That's really, really important. And it's really, really hard. And related but different, again, is not taking things personally, because it's so hard to not take it personally. And I keep working on that. And I'm sure I'm going to keep working on both of those things. But there's no easy answer. And I think that's why when you talk to other founders and you talk to people who regularly support founders, everyone will tell you this is hard. It is really, really, really hard. So reminding yourself that it's not just you. What you're doing is incredibly hard. You are playing on the most challenging difficulty mode that you could possibly be playing on, and also that you're not going to get it all done, and that's okay. And you need to give yourself grace and space and time and sleep. and exercise and stop rage eating the cupcakes, which is probably my biggest flaw, rage eating the cupcakes. Um, that's really important too. And I think, Carl, you had asked, where do I find support? Those challenges have very different support mechanisms because there's the support of our advisors who like to check in and always give good tactical and strategic advice that benefits the company. And part of that is benefiting the founders because if the founders aren't functional, the company isn't functional. There's also personal support. My husband, I could not do this without him. My best friends, communities of other founders, which have been amazing. And you know this, like what I have found with every other founder I have talked to without exception is everyone knows how hard it is and they want you to succeed. And they are there to support you and they're there to help you, and feeling like you have these other people who have been there and who have had the same experiences and who are rooting you on is so important. And then I think also, this sounds cliche, but just self-care. Like I have a dog, which is amazing for a founder because I have to walk him every day. So I get out in the fresh air and I walk for at least a mile, if not longer. And that 25 minutes away is incredibly helpful for just clearing your head. And sometimes you just need to get outside and away from your desk.
Have you found that the way you lean on your support structures or the need to build new support structures for yourself has significantly changed between sort of what I assume were relatively high pressure jobs at big companies with lots of agendas like Amazon? I know Microsoft has sort of one reputation around this. Amazon has a totally different, very engaged culture around this kind of stuff. I'm curious, when you evaluate, because you're so sort of freshly moved over into more of this founder journey, how do you see those support structures being leaned on differently, different ones being built as you move from, sort of game industry is a very rigorous job set into founding, still in the game industry, but founding, right?
Yeah. It's a great question. And I have always believed in a personal board of directors and understanding what your own strengths and weaknesses are and bringing in that group of people who can help bring different perspectives, different strengths and weaknesses, different points of view, who you can trust to be rooting for you. And the personal board of directors I needed at Microsoft is very different than the one I need as a founder. And it might mean that, where I had some amazing peer mentors at Microsoft, I can think of one right now who has spent the last 20 years at Microsoft and is not going to have a lot of the perspective of what it's like to found a company. I think of another good friend who has been an amazing support as a founder who has never worked at a big company. And he would not have made the personal board of directors at Microsoft, right? Because his perspective is just so different, and that's okay. So I think when I look at my personal board of directors, I have this core of people who are going to have kind of permanent placement. They're the permanently appointed board of directors, and that might include people like my husband or Shannon or Ron, like long-term mentors that I know will be helpful no matter what the situation is. But then I also have the board members who are on their 3-year terms who get appointed because they understand what it's like to be a founder, or because they understand what it's like to work at a big company, or because they have the right set of skills for that moment. And I think just like you always look at the composition of your team, you do need to always be looking at the composition of your personal board of directors because your needs are going to change. And I really hope the problems I have 3 years from now are not the problems I have today.
In startup life, it is very rarely the same problem. So you got that to look forward to, I guess. Out of curiosity, this is sort of the first time I've heard someone really go with this concept of a personal board of directors that they engage with. Would you mind sharing some more just details of like how you think about that and engage with that personal board of directors in a real, like, because it at least the way you're framing it, it sounds more structured than I think most people think of, like a friend group or who am I talking to this week, right? So, like, how do you think about that group and really engage with it on this support journey for yourself?
That's a great question, and it is structured in my head, but probably does not feel structured at all to the people on the personal board of directors. So, for example, I have my husband who brings not only the perspective of someone whose fate is tied very tightly to mine, but also the person I parent with. And the person where he's not only thinking about how are we going to pay our mortgage, but also how do I make sure that my life partner is happy and healthy and engaged and in a position to be the best parent possible to our kids. Then I look at somebody like Scott Hartzman, who has been through this founder journey multiple times, who mentors and advises a number of other founders. He is my like first person I would call about startup founder questions because he has so much expertise there and because he knows me and we have trust and he's seen me over 20 plus years. Then I have somebody like Shannon where Shannon understands the games industry so well, and she knows and understands so many of the people there and so many of the companies there. So, when we were getting ready for GDC, we did a practice pitch to investors and strategics to Scott, and we did a practice pitch to publishers to Shannon because Shannon has sat on the side of she's the publisher and being pitched. Scott has sat on the side of he's the investor and he's being pitched. And you can see how they bring different but complementary skill sets and understanding the relationships we need to build, having them both in their roles on my personal board of directors has been super helpful. I'll also have people where I might not engage with them as regularly as I do with my husband or Scott or Shannon, but they still bring a really important, really valuable perspective. And that's industry connections, close friends, um, people who have relevant expertise around a specific question, but maybe not the I talk to this person at least once a week, if not once a day kind of relationship. And that's okay too, because if it feels like an obligation, you're probably not getting, you're not giving your best and you're not getting your best from your personal board of directors.
When you look at the horizon for yourself and your own personal founding journey, as well as, the company as well, since those two things are intrinsically tied together, what are you thinking a lot about, right? Like what's on the horizon that is, keeping you up at night or occupying your shower thoughts, the things that you're really trying to spend a lot of brain cycles on.
So short term is heading into Gamescom, which feels a little silly because it's 4 months away, but man, that 4 months is going to be gone before you know it. And we are going to Gamescom with a vertical slice for the game. So for me, it's making sure the team is aligned on what the vertical slice needs to include, making sure that we are set up for great meetings at Gamescom, making sure that we as founders are aligned on what success looks like in those meetings, making sure that the team feels supported and has the resources they need to deliver at their best, which doesn't, to be clear, mean paying people a lot of money. Like we don't pay market salaries, and we are very clear with people that if your primary goal in your job is to maximize your salary, this is not the place for you. But we do have an amazing team that feels trusted and they feel valued. And they are doing some of the best work that I have ever seen. And that is incredibly exciting. So for me, it's how do I help them continue to deliver at that quality bar with that level of excitement, that level of commitment. Medium term, it is really how do we keep the things that make our small team of 6 great as we grow to a team of 12? And how do we find the right long term partners, particularly for co dev and outsourcing, for potential publishing deals, for potential investor deals? How do we go into it understanding the strings and making sure we're okay with them? And then long term, it's really how do I build a company where I can feel like I can very happily spend the rest of my career? My goal is for this to be my last job ever because I want to make a company that I love and that I'm proud of and that I share with amazing people, where we are making a game that we believe passionately in for the people who are the most important people to us in the world.
That answer does make this next question even more awkward, which is I always end the main part of the interview with an entirely unfair question. And I think it's doubly unfair because you're relatively early on the founding journey. In the future, let's jump ahead some indeterminate amount of time. No clear picture on whether Dragon Snacks is a great success, and you're back in this position because of an IPO or an acquisition or something like that, or if you ended up having a closed business, but you're in the position where you could theoretically found another company. Would you do it again?
Yes, absolutely, no question, in a heartbeat. The lows are lower, but the highs are higher. And what really pushed me is feeling like I would regret it for the rest of my life if I didn't start this company. I believe in living to minimize your regrets. I don't ever want to look back 10, 15, 20 years from now and think, man, what if I'd just been brave enough? What if I just decided to take the leap? Uh, and it's ironic because when we're talking about things like heights or anything, I will not take the leap. I am not bungee jumping. But I don't want to be in a spot where I look back and say, if only.
Amazing. Well, the way I tend to sort of wrap up the interviews with what I call the introspection lightning round, where these questions came from is in some ways they're a little bit similar to what it sounds like you did with your values and principles document. They were a set of questions that I went through and answered, and then I would share the questions with anyone who I was talking to about potentially starting a studio, and then we would compare answers. And where they come from is a friend made this sort of observation that the strengths and weaknesses of a company are often the strengths and weaknesses of the founders, right? And so, in some ways, they stemmed from me going like, "Oh God, what monstrosity am I going to create? Let alone am I going to create with someone else?" But also as an attempt to find places where we complement each other, we support each other's weaknesses, we amplify each other's strengths, that kind of stuff. And so we're just going to go through it and just whatever is top of mind for you for each of the questions.
Sounds good.
And the way I always start is, what is your superpower?
Curiosity,
Outside of your superpower, what are your biggest strengths?
empathy, commitment, the idea of just wanting to learn more, wanting to connect more with people and learn more about why they think about things the way they do.
Is that in many ways just curiosity showing up, but applied in empathetic ways?
Yeah, it's very much curiosity plus empathy. And I think having both of those together is what makes it a superpower. It's easy to be curious, but if you don't care about the person or the answer, it doesn't hit, it doesn't really land. If you're empathetic, but you don't bother really trying to understand the person or the situation, again, it doesn't really hit. And when you bring them both together, it's like chocolate and peanut butter. They're better together than they are apart.
For sure. What are your big weaknesses?
Bias for action, for sure. Impatience, wanting to make forward progress, even when it might not be the right progress.
Do you find that like, we talked about it a couple times during the conversation. And to your point, like that is not just for Amazon. Like I've been at a couple companies where biased action is functionally a core pillar, seen as a universally good value for the organization.
Yes.
Where do you sort of like land with where it bridges from strength to weakness for you and how it manifests? Like, what is the manifestation to you where it crosses between the two? And some of that may be context, but in general, like, why do you frame it as a weakness for yourself, right?
Amazon had a really good framing for this, where they talk about one-way doors versus two-way doors. If it's a two-way door, it's a decision that you can easily change, reverse, revisit. And in that kind of situation, bias for action all the way, man, just go, go, go. And I think that that is very true. And that's a great example of um, understanding how often bias for action can be an amazing strength. If it's a one way door, it's difficult or impossible to reverse the decision. And that is when you need to be really sure. You need to understand the implications. You need to gather enough information that you feel confident, but you also can't wait until you've gathered all the information because you're never going to gather all the information. It's just physically impossible. And so a lot of what I will do is say, okay, is this a one way door or a two-way door? And I think I probably mischaracterized some one way doors as two-way doors. Uh, and sometimes it's worked out, but also as I think about coaching myself for the next 12 months, it's going to be really like, hey, even if it feels like the right thing to do, even if you think it's the right decision, we had this thing that we used at Microsoft, PPZomac, press pause, zoom out, make a choice. Even if it's just a like, hey, let me think about all of the things that might go wrong if this is a bad decision and how I can walk it back. That's a really good tool to make sure that even if it feels like a two-way door, it really is, and that your bias fraction is not going to be something that you regret.
What behaviors show up when you're really having a stress reaction, right? Like,
For sure, stress eating the cupcakes.
for sure, but behaviors within sort of
Yeah.
like that can affect others at work. As someone who is also a stress eater, and especially cupcakes, like that has many repercussions, but it doesn't usually affect my co-founders as much.
Oh, uh, I I have actually turned what can be a weakness into a strength in having a very trusting relationship with my co-founders. And this is where I think having co-founders can be so important because we had a situation where someone acted not in our company but in a potential partner acted in a way that was really unethical. And again, I took it personally, and having that trusted safe space with the three of us and being able to say, I might not seem like myself today, and here's why, here's what's really upsetting me. um, that is incredibly valuable. And being able to have the strength to be vulnerable and say to my co-founders, I feel this way because that happened. It's a great way to earn trust. It's also a great way for them to kind of exercise empathy and curiosity, right? And vice versa. And when I feel comfortable saying, I feel really angry because this happened, they can kind of help pick me up, dust me off, and they feel comfortable saying, hey, I feel frustrated because this happened, or I feel worried because this happened. I think that's also true for those co founding communities that we talked about earlier as well. I'm in another co founding community where we talk about memoir moments, which are moments where you're like, oh no, what happened? And I said yesterday, man, I am having a memoir moment today. And just having people who you don't need to say anything else. They're like, been there, done that, hang in there. Wow, that is so valuable.
What do you find you need to have happen in a work setting, sort of on a routine basis for yourself to maintain not getting stressed, right? Like, what are I tend to call them upkeep needs, but things that
Mhm.
just you need to have them happen on a regular cadence to not go crazy, to stay in the right flow, and to just have a really healthy relationship with work.
That is an amazing question. And I love it particularly because I bet the answer is different for everyone. So I was talking to a friend, and he's like, hey, I'm worried about you because I asked for a meeting and it took us a week to find a time slot. Are you overbooking yourself? I was like, no, if I don't have at least one external meeting a day, I feel off. I feel upset. Like, this is how I get energy. I am BD at my core, and I like talking to other people, and I like learning what's important to them and what's going on with them. So this is going to sound bizarre, but if I don't have at least one meeting a day outside of stand up, it feels like, man, where am I getting my energy today? And understanding that I thrive in that kind of environment where I get to exercise curiosity and empathy is really important to feeling like I am doing my best work. Even if that best work might be talking to another founder or talking to someone who's worked with a publisher we're considering or talking to somebody who one of our investors has recommended. I go into those conversations with an attitude of, I am going to learn something from this person and I am going to walk out smarter, more interesting, more informed than I was 30 minutes, 90 minutes, however long ago. So that is a really important part for me to kind of staying focused and feeling like I'm performing at my best.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that and joining me on the podcast. Here at the very end, do you have any closing thoughts or shout outs or anything you want to share as we close out?
For me, I'd like to thank you, Carl, because I first heard about Jam and Tea back when I was at AWS. You were on our Studios to Watch list. And I have felt so welcome and supported from other founders. You're part of that, other founder communities are part of that. And I feel really lucky to be in an industry and in a space where it's not viewed as a zero sum game. It's viewed that we are all in this together. And I am really grateful for leaders like yourself who make that possible.
Well, I thank you very much. I think community is really important. It's always important to help build that community around yourself. So if someone was listening to today's podcast and really heard one of your answers or wanted to dig in and ask you more about your personal board, what is the best way for them to reach out and follow up on something like
Absolutely. Email is the best way. My email address is jen.mclean@dragonsnacksgames.com. Or you can just go to our website and click the contact us budget or button because I see all of the stuff that comes in to contact us as well.
that? Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Carl. I've had such a great time with our conversation.
Thanks for listening to the entire episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with your friends or anyone you think could benefit from it, and leave us a positive rating or subscribe. This episode was edited by Christopher Delano, music by Jake Hall, who's available for composer work in games. And if you're interested in learning more about the Game Founders support community, go to gamefounders.org or email me at carl@gamefounders.org. Thanks so much.